Applause. Thank you. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for your help. So there's a saying in German, and I'm not going to say it in German, but it's on my fridge, and I never forget it. You can always tell a German, but you can't tell them much. Anyway. So the janitor is now going to turn it over to her father. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you. I have no idea what he's going to say, because the last time he did this for me was when I was in Memphis at the Germantown Church, probably 12, 13 years ago. Mm-hmm. But anyway, this is my father, Norbert Alfred Kaul. And he grew up over in the old country. And I will let him tell you where he was born, where he grew up, all about my Oma and my Opa, my grandparents. And I hope that if you ask some questions or things that we can be mindful that his experience is firsthand from a child who grew up. And I will tell you, the family were not Nazi sympathizers. Okay? They were not Nazi sympathizers. And life in Germany was pretty precarious. So he will tell you all about this. It's a different perspective, and it's the ones that you didn't hear about or read about in the history books over here. Okay? So we won't pass judgment tonight on either side about military stuff. Can we agree on that? Yeah, okay. So with that, have a great time, and thanks, Pop.
I might as well sit down.
No, you should leave it again.
Yeah. Guten Abend. Grüß Gott. Good evening, and greet God, because in some parts of Germany, and especially in the southeastern part of Germany, that is a common greeting. Grüß Gott. I hate to differ with my daughter about that you cannot tell in German much. But a lot of times they don't say too much afterwards. But they want to write about it. Anyway, so I was born in November 27th, 1935. So that's right after the First World War. In a region that was heavily industrialized and very much in the coal fabrication. The town, I shouldn't say town, the city that I was born in was named Katowice. It was a city of about 100,000 people population. And I resided in there until about 1944. I was born to a policeman and a cook a chef. My dad was drafted into the service in 1943. And mind you, the draft over there is very differently at that time than what you have over here. If you were a policeman, you were drafted into the occupational police force. You were not a combatant. So, that being said, he see action at the Bulge, and he came home because of a severe case of ulcers in the latter part of 40, almost 44. At that time, things were really getting serious in that area that we were living in. You have to understand that the area where I was at was too far for the Russian bombers to come and bomb, and it was too far for the British bombers to come and bomb. So we had a little bit of a lull time there. But occasionally, the Russians would manage to get some bombs over on top of us anyway. And as it was customary back then, we all had air raid shelters, and those air raid shelters were in the basement. But because of the density of the population in that area, all the houses are pretty much right next to each other. And during that time, all the landlords instructed by the government to create hatches in between the buildings. So you could actually walk from one building to the other, to the other, to the other, until you got to the end of the street naturally. So, as the war started getting closer to us, you could hear the rumbling of the guns, and occasionally, like I say, the bombs could start dropping. And then in the fall of 44, guys, you got to remember, I'm thinking back 80 years. Okay? So they started coming a little closer and closer, and naturally food was scarce as all get out. You all know ration cards, right? We had them also. Milk was only for children and mostly infants. Meat, if you see it maybe once a month, you were lucky, and you had to stand in line to get it. In the fall of 44, my city was overrun by the Russians. There was heavy fighting inside the city. We were ushered down into the basement and locked ourselves in. But you could hear all the gunshots and the gunfire going on and all the screams and so forth. And it took about 2 days living down there in the basement in terror, until it finally the city kind of quieted down, and we were wondering what was going on or what was going to happen. The anxiety was you could cut it with a knife. I know all the kids. I have a brother that's about 18 months younger than myself. We both were sitting cowered in the corner and watching Mom and Dad, and fortunately Dad was there, and he was kind of kept us quiet and kind of let everybody know that just stay calm. That somebody from the occupational forces was going to show up. And sure enough, there was a knock on the door. We should say a knock on the door. It was like a rifle butt hit the door, and it flew open. And there stood a man that filled the frame of a normal door up. A huge Russian guy, a white Russian. He told us not to go upstairs and not to go leave the shelter, because for 24 hours after the occupation of the city was taken, the Russian government gave their troops free will to do whatever they wanted. No questions asked. So anybody caught outside, you take your chances in your hands to see if you're going to survive alive. You always heard stories about the atrocities that happened. After about 2 days, we finally snuck outside just to get a little bit of breath of fresh air. And the streets were littered with cadavers. I mean, we were able to go upstairs into our living quarters to get some water. Unfortunately, Dad had the foresight of storing some drinking waters in the bathtub, because there was no water facility. I mean, utilities were gone. So we were able to have something to drink and whatever food we had saved. And after that time, things started to ease up a little bit as far as occupational things going on, like you didn't hear any more about rapes and other atrocities that were going on, because the government, the Polish occupational, not the Polish, but the Russian occupational forces already had taken somewhat of control. But they were moving troops through there day and night. I mean, you had, as wide as the streets were 10 abreast, hour after hour, they were marching towards West Germany. And they would do what they wanted to do, because when you have troops on the move, how are you going to catch them, right? So anyway, after about a week, we were finally to be able to get outside a little bit more, and that's when you're seeing. And you got to remember, a lot of these Russian soldiers, they came from a very rural area. They have never seen an electric light bulb. They did not know what a radio was. So they were like kids in a toy store. They were breaking into houses and robbing whatever they wanted. And the craziest thing that I witnessed was, here's this Russian soldier, and mind you, we're talking about, by this time we already have snow on the ground, starting early winter. The area where I was from, usually October was time when we got snow. So he had a sled. On a sled, he had a fancy radio, and he heard another guy playing his radio, so he walks over to the radio and starts twisting dials, and he didn't get nothing out of it. It's not hooked up to any electricity or nothing. So he takes his machine gun out and kills the radio. So this is the mentality you had. So after about 3 weeks' time, the Russian government turned over the city to the Polish government, because the Polish government decided that at one time that part of the country belonged to them. I'm not going to argue that point. So, understandably, because Russia took a part of Poland that they said was originally Russia, so Poland took a part of Germany, and because of that fact, the people that were displaced from Russia were brought down to our area and other areas in Germany, and given either living quarters, in some cases whole farms. If they had owned a farm over there, they were given a farm, lock, stock, and barrel. They walked up into your apartment or your house, knocked on the door, identified you as whoever you said you were, and you were told you had 2 hours to leave. So you grabbed what you could, and that's what happened to us. Fortunately, we had a grandmother that was kind enough to take us in. But before that even happened, they came around and arrested my dad because he was a policeman. And he wound up for 2 years in the concentration camp. And for about a year, while we were living with my grandmother, we were able to get some, when I say food, I'm talking about maybe some soup, real thin soup and some potatoes, to go to where Dad was quartered, was stationed. What they were doing, they were using him and people like him as forced labor to tear down industrial complexes to ship to Russia. So, because the guards were mostly Russians at that time, they all had a kind of soft spot for kids. Let's face it, there were mom and dads at home too, so when we showed up with a little bit of container of some food, they closed their eyes as long as it was just us and nobody else. So that kind of helped get Dad through the concentration camp. When I threw I literally mean it, because we lost him a couple of times because he got so bloated with water that he swelled up, and we found out through a doctor that prescribed some medication that was growing out there in the fields that we could go and gather and dry it up and get it into the concentration camp so he could make tea out of it. And the swellings went down and he survived. So this lasted for 2 years. By that time I was it's 1945, I'm almost 10 years old. And I was almost considered the head of household there because my grandpa was, he must have been, by that time, he must have been in his late 60s. And all of my uncles were in the Army, and still some were on the continent. Nobody knew where. They hadn't gotten home yet. So, that being said, my mom had to go to work to support us, and we were lucky that she was a cook or a chef, and was able to work. And fortunately, and I'll say fortunately because the guy upstairs must have been looking out for us. She wound up working for a Polish consulate, and this guy had some clout, and he found out my mom's plight and our plight, and so they started working on trying to get my dad released from concentration camp. And back then on the black market, anything you had was money. Well, everything that we had was going towards providing some cash to pay an official off, to look the other way when signatures were made and Dad got released. Well, he got home, and of course we were all overjoyed. And it wasn't 10 days later they were looking for him. So at that time, a Polish border had been set up between Germany and Poland, which ran real close to Breslau. It's on the Oder River. On one side was Germany, the other side was Poland. So when we found out that they were looking for Dad, we packed our belongings, what little we had, and snuck out of town. When I say snuck, I literally mean that, because we traveled by night over fields and stubble fields and what have you. And we wound up on the Polish side of the river, and in order to get to the German side, you had to rely upon some people that were gracious enough from the western side to come over to sneak you through tunnels and under the river into Western Germany. Well, at that time it was Western Germany, then it turned out to be Eastern Germany. So there we were in a camp where they were gathering other displaced persons to ship out into Western Germany. And Germany agreed to take as many as the displaced persons, German displaced persons, that they could handle. And things were a little bit better over there, but food was still a big, big, big problem. And as we go along and waited there for enough people to get together to make up a train to go into Germany, and when I say train, I'm talking about cattle cars. 50 people to a cattle car. And now we're talking, this is wintertime again, no heat, 4 days on the train. We all got pretty ripe. And when we arrived in West Germany, here again we were in a camp, and their policy was to keep the families together, but to farm them out to different parts of Germany. And you have to remember now that Germany at that time was bombed out. We're talking about 45, 46. So quarters were kind of sparse. We were fortunate enough to be placed in a town called Ochtmanien, which is about 40 kilometers south of Bremen in Lower Saxony, on a farm. And when that happened, we thought we died and went to heaven. The farmer was gracious enough to allow us to grow, gave us a plot for a garden, allowed us to grow our own vegetables. And by that time now, we're talking about 47, that's when the border between Poland and Russia really, and actually Germany, got pretty tense. You were either on this side or on that side. There wasn't too much travel in between. So at that point, we realized that we were 500 kilometers or 500 miles away from home in Bremen. And Mom and Dad found out, especially Dad, found out that we had an opportunity as displaced persons to migrate into the United States of America. We held a family council, and the decision was made. The foreseen near future of going back home was 0. So what's the difference between 5,000 miles and 500 miles? So we decided to come over here. And we applied, and we were granted asylum, political asylum, and were sponsored by of all people, I want to swear, I was born and raised Catholic, by the North American Catholic Women's Association as a sponsor. We landed in New York, and I believe it was Brooklyn at that time, on June the 7th, 1952. From there we were shipped to our sponsor's home, which was St. Louis, Missouri. Well, the longest river of the United States, and Old Muddy, that's what they call it down here, meet. But just to set the record straight, north of St. Louis, the Mississippi is as clean as water as you want to see. Anyway, so while I was over in Ochmanian, I'm regressing a little bit, went to school there, graduated, one-room schoolhouse, 4 grades in that one room. Learned to be a machinist when I came over here, and tried to get a job. They looked at me and laughed. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, first of all, the law in this country says you have to be 18 years before you can work on machinery." I was just barely going on to 17. Now, mind you, I started my apprenticeship as a machinist over there when I was 14. So we decided that for 1 year I was going to go work, because every dime that we had went towards coming over here. Plus, we had to pay for the train ticket from New York to St. Louis that was advanced by the Women's Association, but we had to pay it back. So at that point, it was decided I was going to go back to work. My brother was too young he had to go to school. I didn't have to anymore. And Dad went to work. After a year's time, I said, "Dad," I said, "can we make it on our own?" He said, "Yes, we can." So I decided I went back to school again. Went to school in St. Louis, graduated from Hadley Tech with a high school degree and a mechanical degree. I applied for apprenticeship as a tool and die maker, and have worked at that trade until 2000. And I've been semi-retired for about 10 years. I own my own shop, but then things just got a little bit too tight, and I'm a proud father of 3 children, 2 daughters, 1 son, 5 grandkids, 3 great-grandkids. My grandkids, my oldest granddaughter is employed by the University of Washington. Washington University, excuse me, Mama. My grandson is with Charter Communications. My other son works for Walmart. And my other grandson is a Methodist minister at Festus First Methodist Church in Missouri. My youngest granddaughter, is studying to be a doctor. And so I have 3 great-granddaughters and 1 great-grandson. My son is a technician in the medical instrument business. My other daughter works for a hospital. My younger brother is retired, and he spent 20 some odd years as a truck driver for Yellow. So you got my story here, and that's where I stand. Any questions?
How did you learn to speak English? Did you get that when you were going to school in Germany, or did you pick it up as you came along? How did you...
When I came over here in 1992, my vocabulary was verbatim. I do not speak any English, and it sounded just like that, and I almost got my face slapped in New York when we were on a bus going to the train station, because two ladies sat down in front of us, me and my brothers in front of us, and started asking us questions, and I piped up and I said just like that, I do not speak any English. You should have seen the look I got, right? But that was the extent. So, yes, we picked it up. I picked it up as we went along. Anything else?
You don't have much of an accent, I have to say.
And in some ways, I'm fortunate to be able to pick up linguistically, here's mispronunciation, there goes, comes the German out. Linguistically, whatever region I'm living at, I can pick up that slang just like that. Like, you all come, you hear? So, there you have it. I hope I entertained you. I hope I enlightened you as to where my daughter comes from. But my records. No. This is all verbatim. So, well, this is, like Norlita said, this is, what you heard here is part of what you did not get to read and didn't get to learn in the history books. You know.
I didn't realize that the Russians were bombing that much. I thought it was mostly the British.
No, well, let's put it this way. There were U.S. bombers flown by Russian pilots because Russia did not, until after the war, actually build any airplanes. They had some fighters, from what I gleaned after I came over here, from history books and so forth. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to go take a seat.
Thank you, Pop.
I need a hand.
You need a hand?
Yeah, my knees are locked up.
Oh, okay. All right.
No, it'll be okay if I sit down for a while.
You got it?
I had both of my knees replaced.
Hey, don't throw him around like you throw us around.
Love you.
Yeah, I want to let you know, guys, I served 2 years in the U.S. military service, and this knee was bumped up while I was in the service, and of course, that throws all the load on that leg
What year did you become a U.S. citizen?
That's another story in itself. It was like, I never was supposed to be able to be a United States citizen. After she was born, I applied for citizenship papers. Went through everything, fingerprints, the whole works, send them in, never got an answer from the government. Come to find out later on, the fingerprints were missing. Somehow they got misplaced, mislaid, whatever. By that time I was drafted into the U.S. Army. This is before the Cuban crisis, in other words, 1950. And when I was there, I said, well, I don't have nothing on my hands other than time, right? So I again reapplied for all the needed information and fingerprints. It was easy enough to do because they all were there. I mean, all in the barracks, not in the barracks, but I mean on the campsite. Turned all of that in. I got released from the service. Couldn't find the papers. So I said, what in the world is going on? So I think it was 1970s. 1976, I reapplied. I said, well, the third time is going to be the charm, and it was. And you will find an American that, I mean, a German that's more American than you're looking at.
Yeah. What you see up on the table is the pictures that in the middle is my Oma and Opa, his mom and dad, Alfred and Rosalie. On the side over here, a much younger version of my dad, and then my mom, who passed away in '96. And then on the other side is my dad with my stepmom, and she passed away 15 years ago, something like that.
27.
Okay. 27? 2007? Okay. Yeah, all right. So, yeah, so that's us, and the pictures, that middle picture is like gold, now that you've heard the story. And they were 4 years apart, same birthday, same date was their birthday. Yeah, when they came over in '52, I didn't realize that it was June the 7th. 6 years later, by one day, I was born. They settled into an area in St. Louis called the Soulard area. The Soulard area was one of the first settlements within the city of St. Louis, going back, the French Canadians, back in the 1700s. And so the Soulard area was very German. And so they were on the tail end of what we would call the Great Migration that started in the early 1800s. So on mom's side, I'm like third or fourth generation of German ancestry. And all of them The majority of them all belonged to one parish, the same one they belonged to, the same one I was baptized in, St. Peter and Paul Catholic Church. In St. Louis, in the early 1800s on into the 1900s, St. Louis was a much smaller place, and so within that parish, everybody knew everybody, kind of like this church. Everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows everybody's business, right? But so it is a city that is rich with history. Much of the German influence, though, is starting to wane. But yeah, so I have this, I'm the only child from my dad's first marriage, and so I have this real strange mix of being third to fourth generation immigrant history on mom's side, and being the firstborn child for him in the United States.
She's more German than she wants to admit, because there is a parish in St. Louis County called Assumption.
Yes.
You better not throw a rock in the graveyard over there, because you'd be afraid to be hitting one of her relatives.
Because of my ancestry research that I've done, I realized I am now, I used to think it was just Oma and Opa and a cousin that were buried at the parish cemetery, but then doing the ancestry research, no, I'm related to half of the people in the cemetery. So there it is. I am the first one in the Kaul family to go to college and graduate with a college degree. I was the first one to go higher than undergraduate level. And I am the first minister.
How did you end up becoming a Presbyterian?
You know, yeah, he's gonna run out of tape. You know, I will spend time with you guys, okay? We'll do another informal, and and we'll just chat. But I feel like in the Presbyterian Church, I feel at home.
Well, we're glad you did.
A lot of times when I sit too long or stand too long, they have a tendency to. No, what I wanted to bring up a little bit is I'm proud of all my kids. And first of all, Randy, that's my son's name, actually is a Randolph. He's named after his grandfather that he never, no, he knew him. He is from my second marriage. Her name was Judy, and he's what you would consider all-American. Her last name when I married her was Urington. Her background is Irish, English, Indian, and German. And my other daughter is the same. My second youngest grandson my youngest grandson. His name is Adam, and he is a minister, a Methodist minister at the First Methodist Church of Festus, Missouri. He is in his second year as an assistant minister, and my youngest granddaughter, she is going to be a doctor. She said a child psychiatrist, but we'll see what happens. Currently, she is in Pikeville, Kentucky, in a second-year study. The oldest two grandkids, one is at WashU, and the other one works for Charter up here in So, and the other one works for happy-go-lucky Walmart. And that's about the extent that I can tell you. And if there's anything else that you want to know from me, I'd be glad to tell you.
He's gonna be here all weekend.
And the only reason I'm not staying any longer, no. Remember what she said about my mom and dad's birthday? 7th of May? Coming up.
Yeah.
We don't miss going to that graveside.
Thanks, Pop. Thank you guys again. Hugs and have a great one. And I think there's cake